Mr Speaker, I rise to speak in the second reading of the Regulatory Improvement Bill, and it certainly does give me a great sense of satisfaction to do so. As the Minister has pointed out, I was the instigator of this approach to regulatory improvement in New Zealand through something called the Quality Regulation Review, which was an approach to looking at how New Zealand regulates, how the Parliament regulates, and essentially what improvements could be made in the way we regulate to ensure that business wasn't facing unnecessary compliance costs, and also to ensure that our frameworks were kept up to date and modern and relevant, and that they were risk related. I guess that I experienced the frustration of the hundreds of business people that I spoke to from one end of the country to the other, who expressed to me the sense of an overwhelming burden of regulation that wasn't matched by any comparable benefit that they could see. And that soon taught me that if one is going to regulate, and business accepts that regulation is an important part of the business environment because it's there for confidence and all sorts of other reasons, health and safety to name two. But I think that what they were saying to me was that if there are going to be rules that govern our obligations, then they have to be risk-related. You have to look at what is the risk of this thing going wrong and what are the benefits that apply to the particular regulatory framework that is adopted. And what that said to me very quickly was that you actually could have two sets of rules without offending the principle that one law should fit all. But actually, one size doesn't fit all when we put on our clothes, so I don't see why one size fits all should apply in regulatory frameworks. In some instances, the risks are so minimal that to make the requirements of a larger entity apply to a smaller entity simply wouldn't be acceptable. And to take another line is if one is fundraising from the general public, then obviously the regulatory obligations, the rules, are going to be much tighter than if you're just operating or borrowing from the bank, and the reporting requirements will obviously be negotiated between yourself and the bank. So there are reasons why regulatory frameworks should be fit for purpose at all stages of the regime, and that fitness for purpose may in fact require different rules to be applied at different times. And I think that this Parliament has got a little bit gun-shy of that phrase, regulation. Regulation are just rules. Driving down the left-hand side of the road is a regulation. It's a rule of the road. It's part of the road code. And if we didn't have that rule, well, I would like to think that everyone would drive down the left-hand side of the road, but it could be pretty Wild West out there if we didn't have that rule in place. And I think that was certainly something that I learned, that businesses accept there need to be rules. But what they ask of government is that the rules are kept relevant and that they are proportionate to the risk that their business poses in the particular situation. And I agree with them. The other problem that I found when I went out and talked to hundreds of small businesses was that in fact we end up with a situation where the regulator won't tell people how to comply with the rules. That would have been the second biggest complaint that I had. An individual employer would ring up OSH and they would say, "Is this within the rules of health and safety?" And they would get told, "Well, I'm sorry, we can't tell you whether that's within the rules, but if you breach the rules, we'll be down there to serve you with a notice to tell you that you've breached the rules." Well, I don't think that's good enough. I never thought it was good enough as Minister, and I think that it's really important that we have the mechanism available to us as a Parliament to fix these things as they come up. Now, the third thing that I found out was that small business in particular has had an absolute gutsful of talking to the government over and over and over again. Because we're all politicians, we think of the Department of Labour and the Ministry of Justice and the Department of Courts, and we think of the Inland Revenue Department, and we think of the OSH people, and then we think of ACC. All the business people see is the government. And they say, why is the government continually asking me for the same information over and over and over again? So during the course of this review, I came up with one of those 10-second soundbite phrases that politicians love to create, but I thought it absolutely encapsulated what business was telling me. And that was, why can't the many arms of government extend a single hand to business? And that is a really, really important question for this Parliament, and I hope that governments on both sides of the House, government and opposition, would agree entirely that that should be our focus in terms of bringing down that weight of regulatory reform. And I think the only way that we can do this is through e-commerce, the ability for business to speak to the government once, and then for the government to spread that information across its many arms. And that is so easy to do now that we've got the business reporting language. And I note that there's a guest speaker here from the Netherlands, who of course were the world leaders on business reporting language in the next few weeks. So I'm certainly going to attend that, and I'm sure that others in this House will. That, to me, is the solution for so many small businesses' complaints about the nature of reporting to government. The final thing that I got told, now this didn't come from business, this came from the departments. And what came back from the departments when we raised these issues with them was that none of the issues that were raised were big enough to warrant them going to their minister and asking for a bill on the order paper. They couldn't get a bill up to deal with this issue because it wasn't small enough for a statutes amendment bill. It didn't quite fit the business law reform bill, and so there was no mechanism for dealing for these little issues from different departments. And was there a way of actually getting these things dealt with in parliamentary time in a reasonable way without having to deal with it bill by bill by bill? And you could imagine in this case, and this is the first of the regulatory improvement bills, the Companies Act, the Conservation Act, the Designs Act, the Fisheries Act, the Gas Act, the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries Restructuring Act, the Reserves Act and the Weights and Measures Act. If we had to, as a Parliament, take up a first reading, a second reading, committee stages and third reading on every single one of those bills, we would be spending a lot of time making relatively small fixes. And so my desire was to see the development of a regulatory improvement bill where the theme that the Minister just spoke of omnibus bills, the theme being the amendments deal with an interrelated topic that can be regarded as implementing a single broad policy. It was finally accepted by the then Clerk of the House that this was a single thread that could be accepted as that interrelated topic, and that was the improvement to regulatory frameworks. Now, I'd actually been to the Standing Orders Committee and made the case to have the list of types of omnibus bills that can be introduced amended so that it included the regulatory improvement bill along with the Business Committee's agreement to the bill's introduction as an omnibus, the Business Law Reform Bill. So I wanted to have this actually written into the Act as one of the bills that could be proceeded with as an omnibus bill as of right. And I still would like to see that happen. I am pleased that it has been accepted in this case, but it has to be agreed by the Business Committee to be introduced as an omnibus bill. I actually think we could do better than that. We could write it directly into the standing orders and say the theme of regulatory improvement is something the entire Parliament is committed to on both sides of the House, and we could agree to do this every year. This would be so much easier, and we could send messages out to departments and say, this is your chance every year to make it better for business, better regulation. And I've heard the government of the day say better regulation, fewer regulations. This is the best way of achieving that.